The U.S. Supreme Court. So this matter presents itself to the United States Supreme Court. So in my mind, three things can happen. One, they don't take it up in full, even though I strongly feel they should. Hopefully there's 4 justices, as I understand it, that are required. Number two, Sam Alito, and hopefully a majority, will say, okay, those segregated votes, they were segregated out. Those are unconstitutional. Don't blame us. Don't blame the legislature. Right. You can blame the governor, and you can blame your state court. Or number three, that nobody's thinking about, and I don't particularly like it. The court could say, look, those segregated votes, from our perspective, are unconstitutional, but we're going to leave it to the United States Congress to determine whether they're unconstitutional or not, and the state legislature is free to send its own list of electors based on the original statutory election laws. We'll now know how many because they're segregating the votes. If, in fact, the President of the United States won under the existing law before it was changed by the state Supreme Court. In other words, there could be 2 sets of electors set, one certified by the governor, one certified by the legislature under the federal Constitution, and Congress can sort it out. What do you think of those 3 possibilities?
Right. Heaven forbid for 2 of them. On the one that I think is the more or most likely is that the Supreme Court will now do its duty in the Pennsylvania case, because it was very clear from the outset that what the governor did and what the state Supreme Court did was utterly unconstitutional. So it's a lawless act. And at this stage, the Supreme Court has a solemn duty, in light of the nature of the issue and the stakes at hand, has to take the case. And I think, by the way, the earlier determination by Justice Alito to call a halt to any counting, if that had begun, of these set-aside ballots, the ones that I view as illegal. They're just illegal. They don't and should not count. His determination to do that is a signal. It's not an assurance, but it's a signal that a majority of the Supreme Court would uphold what Justice Alito has done. We'll see. That's a guess, but it's a reasonably educated guess.
I hope you're right. I'm concerned about the Chief Justice, who made some cockamamie distinction between a federal court and a state court and a state court. Does the Constitution, as we read it aloud, as I read it aloud and you've discussed it, is there any language in there about the distinction between state and federal courts?
Absolutely not. So I must say I did not admire that distinction that Chief Justice Roberts, who's very able, made. And by the way, he voted in the Wisconsin case where a federal judge did what Governor Wolf was doing in Pennsylvania. When a federal judge in Wisconsin engaged in those shenanigans, perhaps for a noble reason, let everyone vote and so forth, that federal judge was acting lawlessly. Happily, the Court of Appeals in Chicago put a halt to that. And then the Supreme Court of the United States, without any dissent, so consider that at the time 8-0, said the Seventh Circuit was right, the federal judge was wrong to interfere in that state election. Okay, so that's all good. That's the distinction that Chief Justice Roberts drew with respect to Pennsylvania. But the underlying principle is not one of federalism, as you rightly point out. The real point is legislature, legislature, legislature. Let us all return to the Constitution, read it. It could not be more clear that it's the legislature that's boss and not Governor Wolf.
When we return, Judge Starr, I want to ask you a question. How do we select presidents in this country? By the declaration of media organizations and decision groups, or by our constitutional process, the Electoral College, and the statutory process which follows, meeting in Congress, voting in Congress, and so forth? And when there's ongoing litigation, serious litigation in a variety of states, and litigation that is going to come before Congress meets, is that to be dismissed when we consider whether or not a declaration of this candidate or that candidate is President of the United States?